The morning I found out I'd inherited nearly $2 million from my brother was the same morning I made a pot of coffee, sat down at my kitchen table in my bathrobe, and cried for 45 minutes straight. Not from joy, not from grief, exactly, though grief was certainly part of it. I cried because Warren had been gone for 3 weeks, and I still reached for the phone every Sunday at 2 o'clock to call him. I cried because the lawyer's voice on the phone had been so matter-of-fact about it, reading numbers like a grocery list. And I cried because my daughter was sitting right across from me, holding my hand, telling me everything was going to be okay, and in that moment I believed her completely. I want to hold onto that image of her for a second. My daughter, 41 years old, her dark hair pulled back, squeezing my fingers across the table. She had driven 3 hours from Charlotte the night before when I called her with the news about Warren. She'd held me while I cried. She'd made me toast. I didn't eat, and tea I didn't drink, and she'd slept on my couch so I wouldn't be alone in the house. I thought, what would I do without her? I would find out soon enough. Warren was my older brother by 6 years. He never married. He told me once when we were sitting on the back porch of our parents' house in Greensboro after Mama's funeral that he just never found the right person and eventually stopped looking. He put everything into his work. He'd built a small commercial cleaning company from nothing in the late 80s, grew it steadily, sold it in 2019 for more than anyone expected, and then spent his retirement reading history books and tending the most obsessive vegetable garden I'd ever seen. He sent me tomatoes every August in a cardboard box with newspaper padding. I still have the last box in my pantry. I can't bring myself to throw out the newspaper. He had a will. He'd updated it 2 years ago. He left small amounts to a few charities he cared about, a little to a cousin out in Arizona we'd both lost touch with, and the rest, the house, the savings, the investment accounts, to me. His attorney, a quiet man named Mr. Aldridge, explained everything in a phone call that lasted about 20 minutes. The total after taxes and fees were settled would be somewhere in the neighborhood of $1.9 million, plus the house in Cary, which had been appraised at around $400,000 and which I could sell or keep as I chose. I'm 67 years old. I worked 32 years as a school librarian. I have a modest pension and Social Security and a savings account that lets me sleep at night, but doesn't let me do much else. I had never, in my entire life, had a conversation about money that involved a number like that. My daughter squeezed my hand and said, "Mom, this is life-changing." She had no idea how right she was. Her name is Cynthia. She goes by Cindy, always has, even though I put Cynthia on the birth certificate because I thought it was elegant. She's a real estate agent in Charlotte, does well for herself. Been married to her husband, Derek, for 12 years. They have a nice house, 2 car payments, a dog named Biscuit that I adore. I always thought they were comfortable, stable. I didn't know they were drowning. I found that out 7 weeks later completely by accident, in a way so ordinary it almost seems impossible. I had driven up to Charlotte for the weekend. Cindy had been calling every few days since the inheritance news, checking on me, asking about the estate process, very attentive. I was touched by it. We'd always been close, but there's something about a crisis that either pulls people together or pushes them apart, and I was grateful we were the kind of family that pulled together. I arrived on a Friday afternoon. Cindy was still at a showing, so Derek let me in and made me a glass of sweet tea, and we talked about nothing much, the weather, the dog, whether the Panthers had any hope this season. He seemed fine, normal, a little quieter than usual maybe, but Derek was always a quiet man. Cindy came home around 6. We ordered Thai food. We watched a movie I can't even remember now. I went to bed in the guest room just after 10. I woke up at 2 in the morning because I'd forgotten my blood pressure medication in the car. I'm strict about taking it, my doctor's orders, so I got up quietly, felt around for my robe and my keys, and padded down the hallway in the dark. I was almost to the kitchen when I heard them. The light was on under the door of Derek's home office. The door wasn't fully closed, just pushed to, the way you do when you don't want to wake someone but you're not trying to have a secret conversation. I could hear them clearly. Both of them. The thing is, Derek was saying, if we file now, it follows us for 7 years. 7 years, Cindy, we'd lose the house. I know that. Her voice was tight, controlled, the way she got when she was working through something she didn't want to feel. That's why I'm saying we don't have to, not if we handle this right. Handle it how? A pause. I stood in the hallway in my socks and my robe and I did not move. Mom isn't going to know what to do with that money, she said. You know how she is. She's never dealt with anything like this. She trusts me. She always has. Cindy. Derek, I'm not saying anything wrong here. I'm saying she needs guidance. She needs someone to help her make decisions, and that person should be me. We just have to make sure we're in the right position legally before she starts moving things around. What does that mean, legally? Another pause, longer this time. I talked to someone, a financial advisor kind of. He said there are ways to structure things so that the family is protected. Like if Mum were to add me to accounts or if we established something like a trust or even a power of attorney. She's not incapacitated, Cindy. You can't just. She's 67. She's on blood pressure medication. She gets confused sometimes, you know she does. She misplaces things. Everyone misplaces things. Derek. Her voice dropped, but I could still hear her. We are $92,000 in debt. We are 3 months behind on the second mortgage. If something doesn't change, we lose this house by spring. I love my mother, and I am not going to let this opportunity pass because you're squeamish. She doesn't have to know every detail. She just has to trust me. I stood in that hallway for a very long time. I did not get my medication from the car that night. I turned around very slowly, and I walked back to the guest room, and I sat on the edge of the bed in the dark, and I thought about every Sunday phone call with Warren, every box of tomatoes, every year of my life I'd spent being careful and honest, and I thought about my daughter's hands squeezing mine across the breakfast table. I didn't sleep again until almost 5. I want to be clear about something. I did not panic. I am a woman who spent 32 years managing a library, which sounds quiet and simple, but is in fact an exercise in staying calm while approximately 40 things go wrong simultaneously. I know how to think before I act. I also know my daughter. I know she is capable of convincing herself that something wrong is actually right if she needs it badly enough. She was that way as a teenager, she was that way in her 20s, and apparently she was still that way now. I loved her. I also knew exactly who she was. I had breakfast with them the next morning, like nothing had happened. I complimented Cindy on the eggs, asked Derek about the dog's vet appointment, and announced that I was probably going to drive home that afternoon because I had a few things to take care of with the estate. Cindy said, of course, and that she'd come down in a few weeks to help me go through Warren's paperwork. She hugged me at the door for a long time. I love you, Mum, she said. I love you too, sweetheart, I said. And I meant it. Both things can be true. I drove home to Greensboro on autopilot, running back through the conversation I'd heard, trying to find a way to interpret it that wasn't what it sounded like. $92,000 in debt, 3 months behind on the second mortgage, a financial advisor who apparently had opinions about how to position a 67-year-old woman before she moved her own money. By the time I crossed the Guilford County line, I had stopped trying to find a better interpretation. My neighbor's son, a young man named Troy who works in cybersecurity, had helped me set up my laptop 2 years ago when I bought a new one and couldn't figure out how to transfer my files. He was patient and good at explaining things in plain English. I knocked on his door that Sunday evening and told him I had a situation and I needed some advice. I didn't tell him everything. I told him I was worried about someone having unauthorized access to my accounts and communications. I asked him what I should do. He walked me through it. He helped me understand what to look for on my phone, apps I hadn't installed, settings that had been changed. He showed me how to check my email account's login history. He explained the difference between basic digital hygiene and active monitoring. He also suggested very carefully that if I was genuinely concerned about someone close to me, I might want to make sure certain conversations happened through channels that person didn't have access to. I bought a prepaid phone the next day at a Walmart 2 towns over. I paid cash. I called Mr. Aldridge, Warren's attorney, from that phone. I explained my situation as clearly as I could. I told him what I'd heard. I told him I hadn't made any decisions yet about the estate and that I needed to understand precisely and legally what it would take for someone to gain access to or control of my inheritance against my wishes. He was quiet for a moment after I finished. Then he said, "Mrs. Peirce, you need an estate attorney of your own. I can recommend someone." He gave me a name, Patricia Wynne, out of Raleigh. He said she was thorough, she was discreet, and she didn't miss things. I called her the next morning, again from the prepaid phone. I met with her in person 3 days later, taking a route I didn't usually take and leaving my regular phone at home, which Troy had told me was a sensible precaution if I was genuinely worried about location tracking. I didn't know if I was being paranoid. I decided that wasn't the point. The point was to be careful. Patricia Wynne was in her mid-50s, small and precise, with reading glasses she wore on a chain around her neck, and a way of looking at you that made you feel like she was already 3 steps ahead. She laid out my options clearly. She explained what a power of attorney meant, what it didn't mean, what would be required for any other person to legally access or control my assets. She explained the conditions under which someone could challenge my competency and what that process looked like. "The scenario you're describing," she said, "a family member establishing access before the primary beneficiary is fully settled, it's not unusual. Sometimes it's well-meaning, sometimes it isn't. Is there a way to protect against it?" "Yes," she said simply. "Would you like me to walk you through it?" I set up a revocable living trust with Patricia as my trustee advisor. I established a durable power of attorney, but I designated my friend Gloria, who I'd known since we were both in our 30s and who I trusted completely, not my daughter. I moved the first transfer from Warren's estate into an account my daughter had no knowledge of and no access to. I documented everything. I also, on Patricia's recommendation, had a conversation with a private investigator, just one meeting, about an hour, in which I laid out what I'd heard and asked whether there was anything that constituted actionable fraud at this point. The investigator, a methodical woman named Ms. Ferris, said not yet. What I'd heard was a conversation about intent, but she said if Cindy took any concrete steps, approaching a financial advisor on my behalf without my knowledge, attempting to get documentation signed, contacting my bank, that would be a different matter. She suggested I pay attention. She suggested I pay attention. She suggested I note dates and details. I bought a small notebook at a drugstore and started writing things down. Cindy called every 4 or 5 days. She asked about the estate process. She mentioned once, very casually, that she'd talked to someone who worked with elderly clients. She said it just like that, elderly clients, who helped families manage inheritances, so everything stays protected. She asked if I'd be open to a conversation. I said I thought that sounded sensible, and I'd love to meet with anyone she recommended. I said it warmly, the way I used to when she was 16, and I already knew she hadn't done her homework, and I was waiting for her to figure out that lying to me was always going to be harder than she thought. 3 weeks later, Cindy came to Greensboro for a weekend visit. She brought Derek and a bottle of wine I liked. She was charming and attentive. On Saturday afternoon, she sat down at my kitchen table with her laptop and said she'd made an appointment for me with a man named, she called him Rick, who worked with families managing estate transitions. I said I'd love to know more about Rick before committing to anything. She said he was very experienced. He specialized in this. She'd already spoken with him twice about my situation. I looked at my daughter across my kitchen table, and I remembered the girl who used to fall asleep reading on the couch and who cried when we had to put down our dog Chester when she was 12. I remembered the woman who held my hand when I got my cancer scare 8 years ago and sat with me in the waiting room for 3 hours. I said, "Cindy, how much debt are you and Derek carrying right now?" The silence that followed was very long. She said, "What?" I said, "I heard you. That night in Charlotte, I'd gotten up to get my medication from the car, and I heard you and Derek talking in the office." She went through several expressions in quick succession: surprise, calculation, then something I hadn't seen on her face since she was a teenager caught in a lie, a kind of collapsing like a wall going soft in the middle. "Mum, she stopped. Started again. It's not what it sounded like." "What did it sound like?" I asked. She didn't answer that. I told her what I'd done since that night. I told her about Patricia, about the trust, about the power of attorney I'd assigned to Gloria. I kept my voice even. I didn't cry. I'd cried enough about this in the weeks leading up to this moment, alone in my kitchen at night, grieving something I hadn't quite been ready to name. "I'm not pressing charges," I said. "You didn't do anything yet that I can prove was criminal. But I want you to understand what would have happened if you'd gone further. It's called financial exploitation of an elder. In North Carolina, that's a felony." Cindy had tears running down her face. She said she was sorry. She said she panicked. She said the debt was real. It was real, Mom, and she didn't know what else to do, and she had told herself she was just going to protect me, help me make good decisions. She hadn't thought of it as what? I asked. She didn't finish that sentence either. Derek had not said a word through any of this. He was looking at the kitchen floor. I told them I needed them to leave. Not permanently, I said, but for now I needed some time and some space, and I needed to think about what I wanted our relationship to look like going forward. Cindy asked if she could call me. I said I'd let her know when I was ready. She hugged me at the door anyway. I let her. I stood on my porch and watched them back out of the driveway, and I waited until the car turned the corner before I went back inside and sat down. The hardest thing about all of it was not the money. The money was manageable. Patricia had seen to that, and Warren's careful, quiet life had given me something solid to stand on. The hardest thing was understanding that my daughter had sat across from me at this table and held my hand and looked at me with love, and I believe it was real love, I do, while also calculating what she could take from me if she moved carefully enough. She wasn't a monster. She was a frightened woman who made terrible choices and told herself a story about it that let her sleep at night. I knew who she was. I'd known her for 41 years. That's what made it so hard. Gloria came over that evening with a rotisserie chicken and a 6-pack of ginger ale, and we sat on the back porch until almost midnight. She had known about everything. I'd told her everything early on, sworn her to confidence, and she didn't offer opinions about what I should feel. She just sat with me. "You doing okay?" she asked, around 10 o'clock. "I don't know yet," I said. "Ask me in 6 months." She nodded like that was a perfectly reasonable answer. Warren's house in Cary sold in February, a little under asking, but not by much. I put the money into the trust. I sold my own house in Greensboro 3 months later and moved into a smaller place near a park I'd always liked, with a yard just big enough for a garden. I planted tomatoes in the spring, better boys, which is what Warren always grew, because I couldn't quite bring myself to try anything else. I saw Cindy in May at her cousin's graduation party. We were careful with each other, the way you are when something has broken and been partially repaired. We hugged. We talked about the weather, about her cousin's plans, about the drive. She looked tired in a way I recognized, the tired of someone who's been living with what they did. Before we left, she stopped me in the parking lot and said, "Mum, I have to say this. What I did, what I was going to do, I'm ashamed of it. I'm ashamed every day." I looked at my daughter in the afternoon light and I thought about all the years and all the ordinary Sundays and the fact that shame, real shame, is not nothing. "I know," I said. "I believe you." We didn't hug again, but we walked to our cars together and that felt like something. Warren would have had opinions about all of this. He would have sat on a porch somewhere with a glass of iced tea and delivered them in his slow, deliberate way, pausing at the right moments, making me laugh even when he was being serious. He would have said something about tomatoes and something about patience, and probably something about how people are always more complicated than they look, which was a thing he believed down to his bones. I missed him every day. I still reached for the phone on Sundays. But I had a garden now, and a house I loved, and a trust drawn up by a woman who didn't miss things, and a friend who brought chicken and ginger ale and knew when not to talk. I had almost $2 million that my brother had earned through 30 years of honest work, and had decided to leave to me. And I was not going to let anyone take it from me, not out of panic, not out of love, not for any reason at all. I raised my coffee cup one morning toward the window, where the tomatoes were coming in red and heavy on the vine. To Warren, I thought, and to paying attention. There's a moment somewhere in the middle of all of it that I keep coming back to. I'm standing in a dark hallway in my socks at 2 a.m, and I can hear my daughter's voice through a half-open door, and everything I thought I knew about my life is quietly rearranging itself. I didn't move. I didn't make a sound. I just stood there and listened, and I think that stillness, that choice not to run from what I was hearing, was the beginning of everything that came after. I've thought a lot about what made the difference between coming through this and being swallowed by it. It wasn't luck. It wasn't money, though the money was certainly part of what was at stake. It was 3 things, and I didn't have a name for them at the time. I only recognized them looking back. The first was knowing right from wrong and not letting fear talk me out of it. When I drove home from Charlotte that Sunday, I kept searching for a version of that conversation that would let me off the hook, some way to hear, "She doesn't have to know every detail," as something innocent. There wasn't one. And the moment I stopped pretending there might be, I could actually think clearly. That clarity was a choice. It cost something, but without it, nothing else would have been possible. The second was thinking carefully before I acted. I could have confronted Cindy the next morning over eggs. Part of me wanted to, but I knew my daughter. I'd known her for 41 years, and I knew that a confrontation before I'd protected myself would only have given her time to move faster. So I drove home. I called Troy. I found Patricia Wynne. I bought a notebook and wrote things down. Every step I took was deliberate, and that deliberateness is what gave the law something to work with. You can be as righteous as you want, but righteous without preparation just means you lose more slowly. The third was not giving up, even when what I was protecting myself against was someone I loved. That was the hardest part by a distance. It is one thing to fight a stranger. It is another thing entirely to sit across a table from your own child and say, "I know what you were going to do, and I didn't let you." The grief of that moment was real. The love underneath it was real. I held both of them, and I did not let the grief convince me I was wrong. Warren spent 30 years building something honest, and he left it to me because he trusted me to steward it well. I think about that whenever I walk out to the garden. He didn't leave it to me so it could be taken. He left it to me because he believed I was the kind of person who would hold on to things that mattered. I'm trying to be that person. Cindy and I are still finding our way back to each other. It's slow and it's careful, and some days it feels like crossing a river on stepping stones. You can't hurry it without falling in. But I think we're going to make it. Not because everything is forgiven and forgotten, but because she looked at me in a parking lot in May and told me the truth about her shame. And I believed her. That's not nothing. In my experience, that's actually quite a lot.